this classwork, which has been entirely in the new dimension, Christ, has as its basis the revelation of a presence and power that cannot be defined by human thought, and which ordinarily is not brought into play in human experience except by those who have caught a vision of a spiritual universe. The ordinary human thinker does not penetrate that realm of the spirit. Their entire life and reasoning faculties and awareness remains in a three-dimensional world. A world that can be seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelled, and thought about. And thought about from this standpoint of what can be seen, heard, tasted, touched, and smelled. In that realm, we have might, power, strength, wisdom, cunning. We have all forms of human powers either aiding us or harming us, either being used constructively or destructively. And the human world is made up of that entire picture, sometimes good and sometimes bad. And the reactions that come to an individual from what they behold with their five physical senses and the reasoning mind. The few who penetrate that scene and see across into the spiritual realm have discerned that there is another power, another presence, that is neither power nor presence in the human sense of understanding. It is not presence because it is not outlined form. It is not power because it does not supplant or overcome or rule or govern other powers. Yet it is a presence in the sense that the spiritually illumined feel it, sense it, cognize it, are aware of it, even while the it has no actual form, outline, color, or dimension. And it is a power because its very presence reveals harmony, even where discord, disease, sin may have been. The mystics of all ages, and when we use the word mystics, we mean, of course, those who have attained some measure of conscious oneness with God, some measure of contact with cosmic consciousness. The mystics of all time have discerned this invisible presence and power and availed themselves of it, and through it risen to great lives of peace, harmony, joy within their own being, although many of them have suffered persecution from the outside world. This, of course, has never disturbed their inner being. They understand the reason for this persecution, since they well realize that this power would destroy those and the activity of those who might permit it entrance into their consciousness, and they are not ready yet to see the advantage of giving up their life, their personal sense of life, for this divine life or spiritual life. To the materialist, it is a very difficult thing to imagine being happy by giving or being wealthy by giving. So all his training is that happiness and wealth are to be achieved by getting. This three-dimensional world, which is what is called the human world, material world, but really is only a false concept of the real, is never destroyed in and of itself. It is seen through. It is understood for what it is, and in that understanding comes the dissolution of it. In other words, there is no such thing as an objectified, physical, mortal, material universe. The only universe there exists is this spiritual, real world of God's creating. And the proof of that is that the moment a degree of inner vision is awakened, this world becomes the only real, and the mortal concept begins to lose reality and to disappear. Probably many of you know that as long as there has been recorded history, there have been secret religious orders, secret religious brotherhoods, under many names, formed for many different purposes. I think most all of them very good purposes. And they all require a form of initiation. The initiate must go through certain trials, tests, examinations, before they ultimately are admitted to brotherhood in these religious organizations. And while the actual initiation may differ in exterior form, the tests and trials and examinations are all alike in this: the initiate must go through harrowing experiences, such as if they have loved ones at home, in their meditations and in their periods of quiet, they behold pictures of these loved ones dying or being killed or robbed. If they are married, they may see visions of betrayal, falseness, deceit. Other loved ones may come under other forms of evil. They behold all this. The temptation is, of course, to leave this order and get back home and protect their loved ones or bury their loved ones or do whatever is necessary to restore harmony in their experience. And of course, at each one of these steps, some initiates do fall out and go home, and that ends their spiritual progress. Others manage to get past that and find themselves in other harrowing experiences and drop by the wayside. But eventually, those who survive come to one ultimate test. Everyone in every one of these orders goes through the same test. The final test is being brought to the brink of a cliff and being told, and of course one must be obedient, being told to jump off onto the rocks beneath or the waters and be killed. Of course, it's so high, the rocks are so terrible below that there is no hope of survival. It is actual death. But then the whole thing is, which will it be, death or disobedience? If it is disobedience, there's no hope of being admitted to the brotherhood. If it's death, that also may mean no hope. On the other hand, who knows? Might be one here or there might survive, since there are some brothers in the order. They must have survived. Well, there's the test. Each one decides for himself. And needless to say, anyone who is obedient and jumps off the cliff automatically becomes a member, for the simple reason that long before they can reach the rocks, they have awakened and found that the whole thing was an illusion. They had been hypnotized into witnessing all of these pictures from the very first to the last. None of it was ever real. And of course, those who stopped earlier in the game and went home found to their dismay also that none of that had ever happened, and they had just lost their chance for spiritual progress. Those who survived the final test were happy to be admitted to the brotherhood, but something greater had happened than being admitted to a brotherhood. They had learned the entire secret of human experience. It is a state of illusion. Such conditions do not exist anywhere in the realm of the real as they were tempted to see and believe in. And of course, if you want to know it, we are the initiates. And we are right now taking the degrees of brotherhood. Right now we are being tried with experiences of lack or limitation, sin, disease, and some of us actually death. And you'd be surprised at the looks on some of the faces of the people who thought they died. They're quite surprised when they find that the whole experience is an illusion. Never happened. There they are, beginning right where they left off. We may not have realized that we were undergoing this initiation, but we are. Everyone who has been responsible for spiritual healing work knows right well that they have never healed a disease or set a bone. All they have done is pierce the illusion of hypnotic suggestion and seen through to the world of God's creating, to the man of God's creating, to the laws of God's creating. And that is why we have today healers, metaphysical healers, spiritual healers. Every one of them, in a measure, has seen through the illusion, has seen that God is the only life, the only wisdom, the only law, the only substance, the only cause, and the only effect. And so, when you face this human experience from the standpoint of believing that you have a choice, remember that the only choice is to have a good illusion or a bad illusion, to have a rich illusion or a poor illusion, as long as we are viewing life from this appearance standpoint. Now, the human mind cannot pierce the veil any more than the initiates in the Brotherhood can pierce that veil while under hypnotism. It is only as they come out from the hypnotism that some have, by divine grace, enough light to know that they had been hypnotized and to disregard the experience they had gone through. Others, still carrying a measure of hypnotism, believe that it was real and run out to do something about it. Now then, this faculty that enables one to pierce the veil, to see through the illusion, is called Christ. It is called soul faculties. It is called spiritual consciousness. And spiritual consciousness means consciousness of the Spirit, or consciousness of the things of the Spirit. And you can see that material sense could never have that. Some, fortunate indeed, come unto this plane of existence with some measure of that illumined consciousness, enough at least to behold to some degree a reality. Others, and most of us are in that category, have only this more material sense of things and find it very, very difficult even to believe that there is a universe of harmony right here and now, and that we, all of us, may enter it at will, not by choice, but because there is no other universe, and all that is necessary to behold it is a tiny measure of that touch, that Christ consciousness, that spiritual awareness. And so the question that comes to us, and this is the question that will come to you as people come to you for help, and is the answer you will have to give: how may we have the ability to pierce that veil, to see through the illusion, and to know that it is very safe for us to jump, since the only place we can jump is into the everlasting arms. The answer is this: you have already the first seed of that illumination. It is because you have that seed that you started in the beginning on a spiritual path. It was that spiritual seed that drove you there. Until you had it, you could not have come to any spiritual teaching. It would have bored you to death. It would have angered you. It would have seemed nonsensical to you. Because the things of God are foolishness with man. And the mere fact that this isn't foolishness to you is the indication that already you have risen above the level of mortal man. In that degree, then, you have no choice but to continue. Nor need you have any doubts or fears about the ultimate result. The fact that you have been placed on the path is enough. Probably the greater efforts, fears, or doubts you entertain temporarily about your ability to attain may, for a while, prevent the attainment. Or, the other way around, the greater your ability to relax, the greater your ability to understand that you are not here of your own choice or by your will, but that a seed was planted in you and that it is sprouting, the more you can realize that and just step aside and let it take its normal course, the more quickly will you awaken into your membership in the brotherhood. It is inevitable. You can't miss. The awakening is an act of grace. It is an act of God for which you have no personal responsibility. The government is upon His shoulders. Only, mark this, only as you look out on this world from the standpoint of appearances will you see yourself having to struggle and strive to achieve spirituality. The longer you look at life from that standpoint, the greater the struggle. But in this very moment, as you drop that barrier, as you drop the sense of looking out at a world of illusion and trying to improve it, as you quietly sit back in the realization, certainly, what else is true, what else is logical than that God is the creator of this universe, and it's the creator, the maintainer, and the sustainer. And if this is true, and we have entered a state of illusion, what could be truer than that only God could be the destroyer of the illusion? And so again, where is your personal responsibility? You haven't any. Be normal. Be natural. Live every single day in accord with a pattern that is placed before you in the morning. Yes, we have an obligation, but even violating it will not keep us out of heaven, since already the seed is planted and is growing. But the obligation is keep in thought, so far as is possible, the idea that you must never judge either man or circumstance from looking at the world from the standpoint of its appearances. Stop looking at sick and sinful men and wondering how to make them well. Stop looking at the pictures that are painted in the newspapers and radio and television and wonder how you are going to improve it. You aren't going to improve it. Illumination is going to dissolve it. And the greater part of illumination is the realization that only God can do that. We spoke the other morning about the fact that the salvation of the world, that is, the redemption of the world, the revelation of the world in its spiritual perfection and purity, is not only inevitable, but it is not even far off. Progress toward that is so rapid that I don't think I could be surprised if I woke up tomorrow morning and found the entire world at peace and in the arms of God. even that rapidly wouldn't surprise me too much for this reason. It is only 200 or 300 years ago that there was no scripture in circulation. It's only 400 years ago or 5 that a printing press printed a first copy. And hundreds of years later, there weren't many copies in existence, not many for the layman. So it's really only in the last 200 or 300 years, 250 years, that men have had access, men and women have had access to Scripture, which is a revelation of the power of love, a revelation of the power of grace, a revelation of a God in individual affairs. It is only in these last 150 years that we have had the great art, music, and sculpture of the world made available to the common man, the ordinary man. Education up to then was purely for those who entered the church, and outside of the church there was very little of education. And so all of this cultural good has come into realization, and philosophical and spiritual, scriptural, in just these last couple of 100 years. It is only in the last 75 years that the world has been given this revelation of the nature of what we are facing as human experience. Up to that time, the world was battling evil as if it were a reality. They were battling the devil as hard as you'd battle a 4-alarm fire, and not making much headway with it either. Now, in this last 3/4 of the century, the world has become less afraid of hell and damnation, less afraid of God, less afraid of disease, with the exception of a few that are held in wide fear. But on the whole, the world has much less fear of disease and much better ways of handling sin. In other words, human consciousness is being illumined rapidly, illumined with the understanding of the grace of God, illumined with the understanding of a divine presence and power, and above all, illumined with forces of love. You can see that expressed in human form in the relationship that has come into commercial affairs in the last, shall we say, 30, 40 years. Watch it in the corporations of the country and business of the country, and see the greater degree of love there is. Watch the greater efforts of nations to help other nations, of peoples to help other peoples, in spite of their prejudices and hates here and there. The overall scene is good. Now, when human consciousness is receiving a sense of love, a sense of peace, a sense of realization of a presence and a power, it is not far from heaven. It is not far from spiritual realization. And that is happening, and happening rapidly. If you were to look at the world from the appearance world and count up how many wars there are or how many nations in distress, this may not be so evident to you. But look at it from my side of the curtain, and you will see not so much the outer struggle and strife that's going on, but the degree of illumination that is entering consciousness, human consciousness, on a broad and wide scale. That is the picture I see. Now, we can carry ourselves a step further than that so as to continue to be the light for the rest of the world, in the degree that we do not become fascinated, hypnotized by the world of appearances, but go behind that world with even this little understanding that we have been given, that we have to this moment demonstrated, and look at it always from God's side. That is going ultimately is going to be the saving grace. The ability to look out at the world from God's side, not from the side of appearances. Now herein lies the secret of dehypnotization. That is, the secret of waking out of the illusion, out of the illusions of sense, temptation, mortality, ignorance, superstition. Look out from God's side. First of all, be sure in your mind that you have caught a glimpse of God as the infinite power of good, as the infinite substance and the law of the universe. Then as you look out from God's side of the world, you will find a God-governed world, a God-maintained and a God-sustained world, and whatever of illusion there is, you'll find God to be the destroyer of it. And as you realize this, personal responsibility drops off of your shoulders. Personal responsibility drops away, and you know right well that you do not have to struggle for enlightenment. It is coming to you as fast as you can accept it, as fast as you can respond to it. Just continue on in the path in which you find yourself. Continue on in the way and in a way that satisfies your own integrity, your own inner consciousness, that you're doing all that may be expected of you, that you're doing all that is up to your highest sense of right, and beyond that, you have no responsibility. The government is upon his shoulders. Looking out at this world from the God side, you quickly behold the sons of God, and you witness a degree of individuality based completely on spiritual values that shows you that man does not have to be saved. Man does not have to be rescued. Man does not have to be healed. It is just an awakening process. But since one with God is a majority, one awakes, and that means one Christ, can awaken millions, 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 millions. One Jesus, rightly understood, can awaken millions of people on the face of the earth. One Mary Baker Eddy has healed and awakened more millions than you have any idea of, and so has one Mrs. Fillmore, and so has one somebody else. It only takes one, only one, to have the light that sees from behind the scenes, from behind the spiritual scenes. Now, you can see that in these questions, we have the question based on life as we see it from mortal experience, and then seek a solution to it. And there is no solution. There is no solution to the human scene except waking up out of it. There is no solution to the human scene in human means. The solution lies in spiritual means. If you are thinking for one single moment of the unhappy relations that have existed this last 20 years between what is called capital and labor, you will know right well that there is no human solution to it. There is a spiritual solution, and that is as you begin to see that man whose breath is in his nostril is not a reality, is not a law, is not an evil, but an illusion, and that actually even there stands the Christ, you will soon find capital and labor in harmonious relationship to each other. And that's the only solution. It is in the same wise that you can start with two people, any two you know, and let them view each other as human beings. Let them believe for a moment that one derives their good from another. Let them believe for one moment that their interests may be antagonistic to another. And you have the makings of all the wars and all the discords and all the ulcers and all of the troubles that ever could be in a universe of millions of people. Just multiply the human relationship existing between almost any two people, and then you'll find what the human world consists of, and you'll also know that there's no solution to it on the human plane, because always each one will be seeing what their rights are, and the other will be seeing their rights. One will be seeing their privileges, and the other will be seeing the other's duties, and so no coming together. But just with any two people in the world, let one begin to understand the spiritual nature of individual being, and you will begin to see a change in relationships, even if it's only at first on one side. Even on the side of the one who has caught the first glimpse of spiritual life, you will find less antagonism, less greed, less anger, less fault-finding, less of the negative qualities of humanhood. And it would be an utter impossibility for one individual out of two to consistently be living in a consciousness of love and forgiveness and not have the other one respond in some measure eventually. Or as we know, respond or move. And that would just leave room for someone else to come in harmony, in peace with the new idea, the new dimension, or Christ. The moment one individual begins to look at life from the standpoint of God, starting every opinion, thought, every conviction from the standpoint of God as the first word, the moment an individual begins that mode of life, all the rest of the world begins to respond to it. There's no question about that. No question about that. We have just again had the experience of one of our friends coming in contact with an intoxicated man and quickly coming over and seeking an introduction and talking about God for a half hour. I thought it just happened again. You can't miss. You just can't miss. Begin to see life from the standpoint of God. That's the new dimension. God, the Christ. Begin to see this universe not from the standpoint of man whose breath is in his nostril, but from the standpoint of Christ as individual being, looking through the appearance to the reality, and the world will begin to come to you in this new dimension? Not entirely. There still is plenty of hardened thought in the world. That's not our concern. Our concern is that we begin, since we are of the household of God, we have caught a glimpse, at least, of true being. We are the ones who must start this in our own way. And, I could go further than that and say, not that we are the ones who should. No, we have no choice in this matter. We are the ones who are doing it. We are the ones who will continue to do it because of this grace that has been given to us, even in this measure, to know that God is the principle of this universe. Love is the real influence on earth as it is in heaven. And also we are the ones who know the meaning of that term, my peace. Not as the world giveth, but my peace. And so, because we know that, and because knowing it we can't unknow it, because knowing that it becomes our natural life, every one of us, to some extent, is obeying that impulse to behold spiritually rather than materially. And because of that, and because of the fact that this will continue to grow upon us, it is inevitable that the world respond to it, and that this light go further and further into human consciousness until all of it is illumined. The biggest concern there is in this class, the biggest reaction that I get from this class in my work with it and for it is a concern for our responsibility, and can I do enough, and will I do enough, and will I measure up? That is why I would like to say to you, no, you won't. No, you won't. But I'd also like to say to you that neither will you fail. Neither success nor failure rests upon your efforts. You are but the instrument through which the Christ, the divine idea of life, is finding entrance into human consciousness. That's what we are. I say you, of course you know I mean we. That is what we are. We are the instruments now being used by the divine consciousness, by the divine grace, to spread its light into darkened consciousness, into the consciousness of what is called this world. The responsibility is not on your shoulder. The choice is not yours. I said to you the other evening, we have no power even to become like Lot's wife. We have no power to turn back, not even the power to look back. Whatever it is we've left back there is gone. We have no choice but to continue forward. Why? Because we did not bring ourselves here to this state of consciousness in the first place. You have not chosen me. I have chosen you. There is something in your consciousness and mine. There is something in our consciousness that has prepared us to be the light of the world. Probably a tiny little bit of a light right now, but nevertheless, the light of the world. And it will continue to express itself in us and through us. It will maintain us, it will sustain us, and wherever necessary, it will destroy the illusions of sense so that we may perceive the mesmeric nature of the world looked at from the standpoint of appearances. No one who has been in this class will ever again be quite as hypnotized by appearances as they were before. That is inevitable. nobody ever again who has been through this week or last or both can ever again be quite as horrified by the bad pictures, nor can they rejoice quite as much in the good pictures, since everyone who has been through this work has been touched by the Christ that so often has been consciously here in our midst, touched to the degree that the appearance world will never again be that evil or disastrous or fearful or doubtful. Everyone who has partaken in this work, whether in the closed class or in that open work at the center, because we had magnificent work at that center. We have had high states of spiritual unfoldment, and there must have been great spiritual consciousness brought to bear and a good awakening that some of the messages have come through that we have heard. And so, with this assurance that we have experienced the activity of the Christ, that we have beheld the very presence of the Christ, how can that leave us untouched, or how can that leave us where it found us? Oh, no. That would be fantastic. We might doubt our own ability to understand or progress, but can we doubt the ability of the Christ to perform its function in us? And has the Christ been present here to no avail? Does the word return void? No, not when you are talking about deific power, Christ's power, the presence of the Spirit itself. There is no such thing as a touch of that finger. There is no such thing as a grain of illumination that does not appear in the outer world as greater harmony, greater peace, greater health, greater supply, greater joy, greater something or other of a spiritually good nature. Impossible. And so, even were you to doubt your own capacity, even if you were to doubt your own motives in being here, do not doubt the activity and the presence and the power of the Christ once you have felt it, been touched by it, or have seen it. Never. And again I say, if you want to doubt it, go ahead and doubt it, because even that will not interfere with the presence and the power of the Christ to destroy every illusion of sense. In other words, do not be so fantastic as to believe that when the presence and the power of God has appeared, that anything you or I might do or leave undone can interfere with it coming to fruition. All of our faith must be placed. No, it mustn't be placed. Don't have any faith in it if you don't like. What difference will that make to God or the Christ, whether you or I have faith in it? Can its activity be stilled once it has been realized? No. So whether or not we doubt, whether or not we fear, whether or not we think that we may not live up to this, it's all the same. It's all the same. The finger has written. There's no question about that. The handwriting is on the wall. Our consciousness has been touched. It has been touched to the extent of bringing us together in, let us say, a room full of people, all on one path, all of one mind, in one place, desiring but one thing, more light, more light. Just the mere fact of being together must make us benefit from whatever light, hope, courage, faith there is in our neighbor's thought or consciousness. And so we not only benefit by the activity of the Christ in its own persuasion, but also from the light that our neighbor has caught. This is one occasion when we may borrow the light from our neighbor, and not only may borrow it, the light from our neighbor's consciousness is shining upon us in this very room. And each one of us is benefiting in a measure by the light in the consciousness of his neighbor and of every other one in this room. And the result is inevitable. The result is that the tiny measure of light that we have given will pour forth into this universe in ever-growing measure, not only lighting us on our way, but what is more important, proving to be a light unto those who are still in darkness. And why is all this? Because of you or me? No. Because the activity of the Christ is inevitable. Because for hundreds of years, the activity of the Christ has been penetrating human consciousness, opening it wider and wider and wider, giving it ever more light and more light and more light, until we have reached this glorious age, when not only we have seen and felt the light which is God, but we have caught a glimpse of the greatest truth ever revealed, and that is that the appearance world is not a world to be destroyed, but to be understood, seen through, not feared, not hated, not battled, seen through in its nothingness, in the illusory nature of its fabric. No greater blessing will ever come to this world than the realization of the fact that we must not be fooled by appearances, and that once the light has touched us, we can't be fooled by appearances. Those who are fooled by appearances to the extent of deadliness, and dullness, grossness, superstition, and fear are those not yet awakened or touched by even the tiniest measure of light. But in the degree that this light penetrates consciousness, in that degree does the illusory picture of sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, war, volcanoes, earthquakes, and all the other evils of human existence, in that proportion do they disappear from off the face of the earth, because they've never had existence as reality. Their only existence was the same as the Anicius experience in the Brotherhood. It was one of hypnotism. The point of this is only that when those periods of temptation come, and come they do, and come they will, to believe in some particularly forceful or evil appearance, be alert. It'll be helpful to be alert and to remember quickly that you are not dealing with that appearance as it seems to be. You are dealing with an appearance that has no substance and no law and can't do anything. And in the measure of your quick response to that memory, will your freedom come from the fear, the doubt, and the delay in the demonstration of good. In literature, spiritual literature, scriptural literature, you will continue to find references to you, he, she, it. Such references as might indicate that you must change your way of life, or you must do something to earn the grace of God, or that he or she must change. I'm going to ask you, even when you read those things, to remember what I'm saying to you now. The responsibility is not on your shoulder. And it is not on his shoulder or her shoulder. And so I will ask you, as a keynote of this classwork, refrain from all indulgence of criticism or judgment of the he's, she's, and it's of the world, and more particularly the judgment, criticism, and condemnation and belittling of oneself and one's own understanding, because the government is not on our shoulders to improve ourselves, it is on the shoulders of the Christ. Rest more in the realization of Christ as being that which is leading us, guiding us, and directing us. Let us never believe that the saints and sages and seers of the world, by some great act of their own will, became saints and sages and seers, because it isn't true. It isn't true. We have seen enough even in this age of the beloved spiritual lights of this age, teachers, leaders, practitioners, to know that not one of them, by their own will or their own grace, ever gave up their personal sense of life to become spiritual teachers or leaders, but rather that the grace of God pulled them out of the business world or housekeeping and made them fishers of men. The Master walked the hillside and selected his disciples and said, "Come, I will make you fishers of men." And perhaps you think that they were of high understanding because they obeyed. No, they had no power not to obey. They had no more power to resist the Master than you and I have right now. When the Master says, "Come, come, I will make you fishers of men," you'll obey. You have already obeyed in being here. You have already obeyed in making the sacrifice of time, money, effort, study, meditation to be here. You've already shown that you have no capacity to resist the activity of Christ in your consciousness, even if you had the will or the desire, which of course you haven't got. But if you had, and if you lack the understanding, and if you lack the wisdom, and if you lack the courage, and if you lack the willpower, it still would make no difference, because there is that in you which is greater than your human sense of rebellion or desire for ease in matter. Yes, the human being has a normal, natural desire to be at ease. But you see, the human being doesn't come out 18 times in 3 weeks to hear about God. Oh no, the human being has weddings to attend and funerals and jackasses to raise out of the road. The human being has so many things to occupy them, tickets for theaters and all the rest of it, that it doesn't respond to the activity of the Christ. But once the touch has reached an individual and they are called, rest assured they follow. And from then on, do the disciples have any responsibility for their careers. No, the Master sends them out. And he sends them out one time without person, without script, and they go that way, and they survive it. He sends them out another time with person, with script. They go, and they survive it. He takes some of them to the mountaintop. He takes them. Do they go? No, he takes them. Have they the power to resist? No. Nor have you, nor have I. This is a life by grace. Everything that transpires in your life today, and everything that transpires from now on unto eternity, will be an act of grace. For I know there are a few of you, maybe I'm one of them too, who will resist that for a little while. Here and there we'll turn aside to indulge some personal sin, some personal will, some personal ambition, but we'll be hauled up, because it isn't given to us to resist the Christ. It isn't given to us to refute or to refuse when the call comes. Oh no. No, we may be guilty of denying the Master, even 3 times. We may be guilty of betrayal. We may be guilty of falling asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane. What difference does it make? Don't be disturbed by it. Don't be alarmed by it. Don't condemn yourself for your shortcomings. Just realize that as part of the illusion that may have been inevitable, but because of divine grace, ultimate salvation was even more inevitable. It is much more inevitable that Peter heal a man at the temple gate beautiful than that he deny the Christ. The denying of the Christ was one of those little incidences of a human falling temporarily by the wayside for popularity of the masses or fear of punishment. Or we may do the same thing. We may. There are people in this work who temporarily are permitting some church affiliation to really interfere with their full-hearted devotion to the following of the Christ, but oh, please be merciful, kind, and just to them. That's just a little twinge of humanhood. That isn't any different than Peter's denial. That isn't any different than the disciples falling asleep in the garden. There's no real harm comes out of it. It's a temporary thing. The inevitability is that through all of those experiences, the disciples would awaken and have a Pentecostal experience in which the Holy Ghost would descend upon them, and they would hear in their own language the language of the Spirit, and from then on go about their Father's business. And even then, they made the mistake of adopting communism. They thought they could pool all their money together and live contentedly by dividing it up, and they had a most horrible experience, leading to what? To the inevitable conclusion that everybody has to live by his own state of consciousness. Everyone has to demonstrate his great income or lesser income. Everyone has to demonstrate the harmonies and comforts of life, not by might, nor by power, nor by dividing things up in this world, nor living off of each other, but by the degree of his own demonstrated Christ. Just as no one in this room can attain my degree of illumination by any act of sharing that I may wish to do, each one must attain it for himself, and I cannot demonstrate a degree of illumination of those who have gone beyond me except in proportion to my own state of illumination. And so it is with supply. Never think that we can divide up what we've got and each share with each other, because that is living off of effects, and it puts us right back into the material sense of existence again, the three-dimensional world. In the fourth-dimensional world, we live by grace, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit. Do you see that? Each one is responsible for his own integrity. Each one is responsible for his own unfoldment. But if you judge from the world of appearances while we are on this 40-mile journey through the wilderness, or the 3-year ministry with the Master, you may well find some of us slipping backward quite a long distance too. You may be well surprised and shocked at some of the things we do, but don't get too horrified. Don't do it. That's just a little human weakness, and the Christ is going to dissolve it just as sure as fate, because the activity of the Christ is the dissolution of our humanhood, of our weaknesses, of our illusions. Patience, patience. We have an eternity in which to work it out. Patience. Patience with each other, but again, and I'm saying this particularly to this class in which there is a great sense of feeling of inadequacy, forgive yourselves and be patient with yourselves, and as often as you fall down, pick yourself up again, because you have no choice. Inevitably, the voice will sound in your ear, come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And you'll know then that it is I calling. You will know right then that it isn't your will, and therefore you cannot have success or failure. Will you remember this? You cannot have success or failure. Why? Because I have called you and made you fishers of men, and it will be my success working in you and through you for my purpose, and you will be the instrument. In moments of temporary failure or seeming failure, please remember that too is part of the plan, and probably part of the plan to teach you that you can't fail and you can't be successful, because the I that called you is the only success. In the deeply religious literature of the world, you find statements like dying daily, or the need to give up one's personal self, or the need to lose one's personal life in order that we may attain the divine life, the spiritual life. All of these statements of giving up the self, destroying the self, overcoming the self, lead the average person to believe that there is some effort that takes on the nature of suppression or repression, and they believe that that is an overcoming of the self, or subjugating of the self, or the dying daily. I refer, of course, to practices like giving up meat, or giving up smoking, or giving up pleasures, or giving up dancing, or other like things that usually are thought of in the way of interfering with spiritual progress. Now, from this standpoint, where we have this lack of personal responsibility, there is no overcoming or destroying of the self that involves any such thing as suppression or repression. The self must be overcome, that is true. Dying daily must be achieved in order that we may be reborn of the Spirit. But suppression and repression, these are not the way. The way of spiritual achievement lies in the lessening of our use of the word I. As we overcome the use of the word I, even in the sense of I desire to be better, drop as much as possible that sense, that use of the word I, and realize instead the Christ. The Christ is really the self. The Christ is really that which lives our life. And rather than indulge these human suppressions and human repressions, let life live itself normally, and whatever there is of an erroneous nature, material nature, sensual or mortal nature, will of itself disappear as you give up the use of the word I and think more in terms of the Christ. That was illustrated this afternoon in the idea of remembering back to our 15th chapter of John and the relationship of the branches, the vine, and the husbandman, the father. If we think of ourselves as branches and then start to say, I need more supply, or I would like to give forth more fruit, I would like to be more fruitful, I would like to be more loving, I would like to be more just, you standing off there looking at the tree would have just a jolly good laugh, as if a branch by itself could be anything or do anything or accomplish anything. But in proportion as that branch would look unto its vine, in the realization that even the vine can't do it, it's the husbandman, the father, acting, flowing through the vine to the branches, then you see how the use of the word I would be given up. Not I wish to be better, not I would like to be more spiritual, not I would like to do healing work, not I would like to benefit the world, but let's drop that I and look down there into the vine and into the husbandman and say, Christ is the world's salvation. Christ is the light of the world. The vine is the avenue through which the branch is fed. And so again you'd see that the government is not on my shoulder, but his that sent me. Again, the branch, we sometimes develop a sense of responsibility to friends, to family, sometimes fears as to what will happen to them without us, without our efforts, without our goodwill. And then there's the time to look ourselves right in the face and say, one branch needing another branch? No. Every branch turns unto the Christ, the vine, which in turn draws from the Father, the husbandman. And so we would be enabled to drop the responsibility for our friends and families, turn them loose. I don't mean neglect them. I know you don't know that I don't mean that. Not neglect them, but turn them loose and let the responsibility be upon the vine and the father, the husbandman, and drop that word I again. And in the same wise, this afternoon we brought forth that we are called upon often to give more than our share to friends, families, relatives, both in money, services, energies, sacrifices. But that is just another opportunity to drop that word I and realize, am I doing it, or is all of this being produced from the Father through the vine? And so again, it isn't I. In the same wise, we may come to the place where we recognize ourselves to be the vine. We recognize that the world is the branches, but But now, through a higher understanding, we are drawing upon the Father, the divine wisdom, in order to aid the world, the branches. But there too may come this false sense of responsibility. Do I have enough understanding to do it? Do I have enough to feed multitudes with or heal multitudes? But there's that word I again. And so the vine, the Christ, dare not say, I can give or I can withhold, or have I enough wisdom or understanding or power, but even the vine must turn and say, the Father doeth the work. Not even the vine. The Father doeth the work. And again, you see, that sense of I-ness is given up. And so in every walk of life, whether we are selling a bill of goods, marketing, housekeeping, driving a car, whatever we're doing, in proportion as we give up the use of the word I say in proportion as we do. We do not quite achieve the fullness of that for a long time to come, but in proportion as we get up and realize that really and truly it is the Christ that functions us, the Christ that functions through us onto the world, in that degree then, are we giving up the self? In that degree, are we dying daily to the sense of personal powers, personal privileges, personal rights, personal healing powers, personal benevolence? And we're realizing ourselves as activities of the Christ. And in proportion as we do not run dry of food. In fact, we have 12 baskets full left over. We do not fail in healing power. We heal the multitudes of those ready and receptive and responsive to the Word. And not by virtue of ourselves, but by divine grace. We have been called, and that which called us, that it is that maintains us and sustains us. Did you not notice in the healings by the disciples that it was always in the name of the Master, in the name of Jesus? All that means is a recognition that they by their own power had not accomplished this. They were dying to their personal sense of spirituality and realizing the spirituality was of the Christ, not of man. Fruitage was not of the branch, it was of the vine and the husbandman. Do you follow that? And that drops the sense of personal responsibility and makes you an outlet, a complete outlet to the activity of the Christ, and puts the responsibility on its shoulder. Now, this new dimension, Christ, is of course a dimension in which all of these earthly powers are proved to be no power by the none power, Christ, by that which is neither might nor power, but which is the all power of the Spirit. And so, it is really and truly a relaxing of might, a relaxing of power, a relaxing of personal sense, with the realization that this invisible and to sense intangible is really the only presence and power that is a presence and a power in our world. That, you see, is the overcoming of the world. It is the overcoming of personal sense. It is the overcoming of vanity. It is the overcoming of the feeling of personal powers, exemplified by the Master in his statement, "Why callest thou me good? There is but one good, the Father in heaven." And so, only, not by suppression, not by repression, but by the use of the word or term, the Christ, rather than I, me, mine. Not only the I announcing its greatness, But even the I announcing its weakness or inability is just as much a personal sense of I as claiming credit for something. Claim no credit, but claim no failure. I have called you, and I, the nature of that which called you, will fulfill you. And you can see that as the disciples went about on their missions, they were not depending on themselves. They were depending on He who had called them. They called it in His name, or in the name of Jesus. And you know that what they really meant was that the power that called us into this missionary work is the power that performs it. Whatever it is that called us out of the business world or out of the home into the healing work, that it is that accomplishes the healing. By His name, by the nature of the Christ, are healings, helpings, harmonies achieved. And all of that involves giving up the use of the word I. And the realization that the one I is He that called me. Now we are in the same position, having acknowledged that we were called to this class, that we did not come by virtue of a personal decision, but that we were called, and that which called us, the name, the nature of the Christ within, that it is that is interpreting the word of truth within us, enabling us to understand it, receive it, and respond to it. And so, there is no responsibility upon your shoulder for understanding anything that has taken place or been said. Nor is there any responsibility upon your shoulder for demonstrating it. And as you drop the use of the word I and realize, why, yes, He that called me is the power, it that called me. The Christ, the presence of God, the Spirit of God in man, that called me is the power, the illumination, the guidance, the direction, the maintenance, the sustenance, the support, the all in all. In this realization of this light, this illumined sense, this illumined consciousness within us, you can see how patient you can be with your faults or weaknesses or shortcomings, and let this light dissolve them, remove them, and reveal more and more of its glory. Sometimes this will not come too rapidly, for fear that when it does, we may be overcome by the sense that it was our wisdom that did it, and our understanding, and our spirituality, and that would be more fatal to us than a delay of a year or 2 or 3, so that it may come through and not startle us into some great belief in our own integrity, our own spirituality. That is why very often this is a slow process, this spiritual incoming. It is that we may not be shocked into too great a witness of miracles, and then believe that by our might and our power we have achieved this. And to the initiate, to the beginner on the path, to the beginning practitioner, that is the greatest temptation in the world. To witness great healings, to witness great sense of supply come in, and yet to be able to refrain from personal glory in the achievement is almost as difficult as the experience of the disciples when they came home bragging about their power over the devils. Oh, but they had no power over the devils. All that they were entitled to was gratitude that they had been called and that the power was working through them. Not that they had power, the power was working through them. But it could only work through them in proportion to their humility. And the true sense of humility is not any detraction of oneself or depreciation of oneself. It is a realization of one's greatness in having been called to be a servant of that master, of that power. Everyone who is called is not a master, but a servant. And to think of oneself as a master is to lose one's place in the spiritual path. Because there are no masters in spiritual truth. There are only servants of the power. That's all. Servants of the power. And anyone who believes themselves otherwise forfeits whatever of light they have achieved. I in my own self can do nothing was voiced by the one we call Master. He did not call himself Master. However, Master is as much of a title as practitioner or teacher is. And in that sense, if the world bestows it, there is no harm. The harm is when an individual claims to be master. Since that is, that is the only danger point that is really in spiritual progress. And that is a danger that the Christ itself prevents in most cases by making our pathway straight and narrow. If there be few that achieve it, it is for this reason, that only the few can witness the great miracles of the Spirit and still remember that it is the activity of the Spirit, not of man. And in the same wise, it takes a great soul to witness temporary defeat, temporary failure, and not have a sense of the personal I as having failed. It's difficult. But it is in those moments of temporary failure, temporary setbacks, that again the disciple must remember it isn't a question of I to succeed or I to fail. The Christ that operates and activates me, it never fails. That is the standpoint of our entire work. The Christ, the Spirit of God, is the motive power in spiritual living and being, and it never fails. And when you witness failure, again remember, you are viewing life from the three-dimensional standpoint, from the world of appearance. Drop that, and soon you will see the success coming again. But it is the success of He that called me. It is the success of the nature of the Christ. It is the nature of the Christ to be successful, and we to be the instruments of that success. Let us rest a moment. Let us begin tonight, from this very moment on, to accept ourselves as the vine. And from rising early in the morning to resting late at night, let us remember that the vine is the instrument through which the Father is pouring its glories into the branches. Let us look out into this world, whether of people, circumstances, conditions, governments. Let us take it as human consciousness. and see all of human consciousness as the branches, and realize that having been called as disciples, as being of the new dimension, Christ, that we now function as an instrument of the infinite invisible, and that whatever our activity may be, in the home, in the business, whatever our activity may be, we are functioning as the vine. And we are looking to the Father within, the husbandman, for continuous support, spirit, direction, love, life, abundance, not for ourselves. Now we are dropping the self. No longer will we seek good for ourselves. We will seek good of the Father, the husbandman, only that it may flow to the branches, to human consciousness, and feed it, and heal it, sustain it, by destroying the illusory sense of existence. Take that humblest of all attitudes, that of being the vine. So many people, think of the Christ as something great that they would like to attain because of its greatness, not realizing that the more of it they attain, the less they become. Never think for a moment that while Jesus walked on earth, that he was looked upon as a great man or a savior. He was looked upon as a servant of the Most High God. He was looked upon as a minister, a rabbi. He was looked upon as a teacher of men. He was not looked upon and glorified. No. The glorification came in the recollection of his deeds of humility. Not in his greatness. He wasn't great. He was a servant. His only greatness was in his humility, in his realization of the fact that he was a vine and that the Father within was the essence of all that flowed through the vine to the branches. That was why he washed the feet of the disciples, unless he could show them that he was but a servant. He could not show them that he was an instrument for God. Otherwise, he would have given the impression that he of himself was some great thing, and therefore when he was gone, that greatness would be gone. But he demonstrated so clearly that no matter what happened to him, since he was only a servant, the greatness would remain to flow into the hearts and souls and minds and consciousness of men in proportion to their humility. Peter and John raised a man at the temple gate beautiful, and the Hebrews marveled. Why marvel, ye men of Israel? As if we of our own selves had done this thing? No, it was the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob that hath done this thing. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead has also done this. Wasn't that clear that they recognized themselves to be instruments of the divine? And so it is. Our friend Lao Tse tells us that the only way to greatness is to make oneself nothing. And now you can see that in proportion as a person would really understand Christ to be the allness of them, in that degree would great works come forth, and then men would give credit and glory to that servant, to that instrument. But the individual himself could only receive that credit and glory in proportion to the humility that would enable him to know that he was but the instrument for the hand of the divine. Not so with us. Never believe for a moment that when you begin to perceive yourself to be the Son of God, the very Christ of God, that you are in some wise glorifying yourself. You are being humble and announcing your nothingness. And in proportion as you understand your nothingness, only in that degree could you be the servant of the Most High, the instrument for the flow of God to man. And perhaps in that humility and nothingness would be your greatness. Oh, there are people who believe that we are almost insulting God to call ourselves the Son of God or the Christ. Well, of course, we don't call ourselves any such thing in public, but within our own being we know that the Christ is really our true being and our real nature, and that as such we are the Son of God. But instead of exalting ourselves high above our fellow man, we are submitting ourselves as servants unto our fellow man. Only in the degree that we realize this can the term Son of God or the Christ be a true name in your forehead. Only do you enter the new dimension Christ when you enter it in the humility that knows I can of my own self do nothing. I am but an instrument through which infinite good is flowing into human consciousness, so that I can feed the multitudes and heal the multitudes, but by no virtue of my own, by virtue of the fact that God is the light of the world, that the husbandman is forever manifesting itself through those individuals who know their nothingness. Whatever our particular work in life must be, let us undertake it in the sense, in the realization that we are instruments for the activity and flow of the divine, and let it operate. But be sure when it does that we don't assume personal credit and personal responsibility, and that we do not go into a personal decline when we go through those periods of seeming barrenness. They may not be periods of barrenness, they may be periods of rest, a further intake. The 40 days that the Master spent away doing no healing work, doing no mighty work. No. When he came down from the mountaintop, he did his mighty works, and probably we will require days and weeks and months of refreshment in which we too will have the feeling of doing nothing and accomplishing nothing while the world is waiting to be healed. Let it wait. The poor you shall have always with you. Don't be in a hurry to save them. There'll be another generation of the poor and miserable right after it. Until the complete illumination. Remember this. The only power we have to help anyone is in proportion to our being fulfilled of the Christ. And so then be not in a hurry to go out until the oil is well stacked up in our lanterns. Wait, be patient. Even though the world is clamoring for healing, let it clamor until we are fulfilled. And then go out in the glory of the Father, in the realization of the Christ, and let it flow. But as soon as we feel the need for further refreshment, let us not feel that the world won't get along without us. can't get along without us, but rather remember we have nothing to offer the world of ourselves. And that only in proportion as we become refilled, in proportion as we become fulfilled, can we go forth into the world and spread the light, be the Christ, show forth the glory of healings and harmonies. No one of himself can do anything. No one of himself should feel that he's important to the world. No one of himself should feel a call to the world. Let the Christ be the call. And then when it comes, be sure to retire often enough from the world to be refilled, to get a greater sense, a greater awareness of the activity of the Christ. Do we have a choice now? Is the opportunity present with us for self-profit, self-glorification, or a personal or selfish use of this understanding? No. There is no such thing. You can see now that there is no choice, and that we have no choice, and that having been called to be fishers of men, we will have to do it in the new way of the ministry, the new way of discipleship. The minister of today and tomorrow, the disciple of today and tomorrow, will wear only a businessman's suit or a housewife's dress. There will be nothing about the minister or the disciple to set him apart from other men and other women. There will be no titles. There will be no fancy dress, for the simple reason that the man or the woman cannot be glorified or set apart, nor can they function for the benefit of the world except as one of the world. Unless the world can say, oh, you are a man or a woman even as I, but you can live this life, therefore there is hope for me. Only in that degree can the activity of the Christ be of benefit to the world today. There was a time when it was necessary to dress up the Christ in fancy robes to attract the unthinking, but it spoiled its own purpose for the simple reason that it set the world to believing, ah yes, you could do those things, but not I. Just look at that robe. Just look at that birth. Just look at your background. I can't achieve it. And for that reason, that type of ministry will not work today. It will not be successful today. Today, it must be the clerk behind the counter who is the minister and the disciple and shows forth discipleship to the other clerks by very reason of their being also a clerk. The only way in which the activity of the Christ can reach human consciousness today is almost, you may say, as an underground work, as a secret work, as the light shines in the activity and experience of the individual who is our neighbor, who is the clerk with us, who is the storekeeper, the businessman, woman, politician. In proportion as we see that light, are we enabled to accept that light for ourselves. And so today, it is the Christ that is being glorified, not the messenger or minister of the Christ, nor the disciple of the Christ, but the Christ, the Spirit of God in man. And we will know now that that Spirit of God in man will appear in the low and the high, the up and the down, sometimes the sick and the well, and the rich and the poor. Why? Because all these things are but appearances. Actually, the Christ appears only as the very Son of God itself, regardless of an outer mask or costume or appearance. We are fishers of men, and we have been called, and we have been called to witness the activity of the Christ, not to witness the glory of a man or a woman, to witness the activity and the glory of the Christ, and to acknowledge ourselves as instruments of it within our own being, but to keep our fingers on the lips to the world. And so thank you, and